Hello and welcome to another episode of How to Paint. Today we are painting up the fearsome General Grievous for Star Wars Shatterpoint. So, without further ado, let's jump in. You can find this miniature in the Appetite for Destruction expansion pack. So I've started things off by assembling the miniature. It is really fragile and fiddly, but you can eventually work it into a pose that you're happy with. And I've got a little bit of a gap on the base between the model and the base, so I'm going to fill this in with some Vallejo Grey Earth. This is a texture paint that just helps add a little bit more to the sculpt and blend in that gap. Next I'm going to do a zenithal prime. So to begin with, I'm going to prime the whole model in black, followed by a white from normally a 45-degree angle. I've had to adjust here because Grievous's cape is so big, so I'm hitting it from the side almost. And then, still using the airbrush, I'm going to use Necromancer Cloak, and I'm just going to spray the cape. You could of course do this with a brush, but this is just quicker and easier for me. I didn't want to overspray too much, so I'm just going in with the brush and finishing out the cape on the front of the miniature. I'm going to slowly introduce some highlights, so I'm starting off with the Fang, and I've mixed this in with the Necromancer Cloak and made kind of a blue-grey. It's difficult to tell at this stage, but I'm just adding in these highlights to subtly build up to that pure Fang colour. And then once I'm happy with those initial highlights, I'm going to go in with the Fang blue and basically just add in those extra highlights. I'm pulling towards the edge of the cape and these main ridges that you see here. This is as bright as I want the cape to be, so this is my main highlight now, and I'm just mimicking this around the front of the miniature as well. For the underside of the cape, I'm going to be using a speed paint, so this is Slaughter Red. And this is just a very quick application, just a single coat almost. And just letting that contrast paint work its magic on the prime underneath. I'm taking care around the edges just to make sure I get full coverage here. Next up, I'm using Gravelord Grey. And I've mixed this in with a little bit of speed paint medium just to help thin this down. And I'm just using this for all of his limbs, his robotic sections on his chest. If the paint applies a little thin, I'll do a second coat, but I'm just letting it work its magic. I'm also using this for the lightsabers as well. Gotta say, I kind of love this white color scheme on Grievous, but next up we're going to move on to the body. So for that we're using Zandri dust, and I'm just applying a simple base coat on all of the sections of the armor. I'm not too worried about any of the gaps on the chest because I will be adding a wash after this, so I'm just getting a basic coverage here. As I get further and further into the paint scheme, I'm using more accuracy, but if I overspill, I'll just go in and clean it with a grey. I want to add a little bit of depth to the armor, so I'm using Seraphim Sepia to help shade, and this is going to darken the whole color scheme, but what it will do is add a little bit of shading to those flatter areas. And then I'm going back in with that original Zandri dust and painting most of those areas back up to that color. I don't want to cover all the work I just did, but I do want some of that shading to still be there. So I'm doing basically 3/4 of that flat area in the Zandri. Before I get too far into the highlights, I want to work on the face, so I'm starting off with a white, and I'm just carefully dotting the eyes. There isn't a lot of room to move here, so I don't mind if it's just kind of messy to begin with. And then I'm using Yriel yellow for his eyes. I'm getting a base coat on there. Again, really carefully. And with some coal black, I'm trying to draw a line on the pupil to help give the impression of a cat's eye. And then of course you can always go back in with that Zandri dust and tidy up the area. And then for underneath his eyes, I'm using Screamer Pink and just, again, very carefully outlining that. This does take a little bit of back and forth just to get it just right, and of course he's kind of leaning down as well. But I eventually got it to a point where I was happy with it. So to continue with the armor highlighting, we're going to be using Morghast Bone. And again, I'm just doing smaller and smaller sections on the armor itself. Initially it's going to look kind of weird, but the more highlights that you add, the more your eye will just blend naturally. So for now I'm just picking large sections and just being kind of bold with some shapes. We've got another stage of highlight here with Deck Tan. So this is going to be towards the edges now of these armor pieces and almost an edge highlight as well. So I'm focusing a lot more of the highlights towards the middle of the face, as I want that to be the focal point. But you can kind of see I'm just using this for almost a quarter of the armor section. I'll also add some edge highlights to the shoulder pads and the chest. And I'll do it on the underside as well. I was going for the idea of like reflected light. It also helps to kind of round out that shape and accentuate the silhouette. And then my final highlight is pure white. And I'm just restricting this to the edges. I'm adding a little bit of white to the face because I still want people to have their attention drawn straight to that middle there. And still using that white, I'm going to prep the lightsabers. This is so that when I use those fluorescent paints, it's really going to be vibrant. I also mixed up a light grey, and I'm adding a few scratchy highlights to the armor sections just to help bring those out a little. I'm going to add a bit of vibrancy to the underside of the cape with Mephiston Red, and I'm just dry brushing this on. I'm very carefully applying small amounts of pressure. The model is very fragile. And then while I've got the dry brush, I'm just going to dry brush on some Deck Tan onto the base. I'm hoping to boost that contrast so that when I use these contrast paints, it will add some depth. So for the statue that he's standing on, I'm going to be using Sand Golem. And just very carefully applying this. I don't want to get it on the feet. And I'm also only applying it 3/4 of the way down. I plan on blending it with another color. And so while that contrast paint is still wet, I'm now using Hardened leather and I'm filling in the rest of that statue. I'm letting the contrast paints kind of blend together in the middle and help hide that seam. The colors are very similar, but there's a subtle difference once you add both of them together here. And then for the rest of the base, I'm using Skrag Brown. This is the color that I use on all of my Shatterpoint bases, so this helps tie it into the rest of the miniatures. Now that the base has got some color on it, I can kind of see the overall miniature and how it's looking. So now I'm going back to the lightsabers and adding some Tesseract glow to the green lightsabers. This is fairly strong, so this is just a single coat first. And because these lightsabers are so thin, you have to be very careful you don't accidentally flick the end of the lightsaber and that will spray the paint on the rest of the model. For the blue lightsabers, I'm using Pylar Glacier. And this is a contrast paint, but it's also a little bit thinner than Tesseract Glow, so this will take a couple of coats to get that blue that I'm hoping to get. And I'm also adding a little bit of those greens and blues onto some of the surrounding areas to add kind of a highlight from the lightsaber. Not going too overboard with this, but just on the edges. And then I'm adding some white to the ends of the lightsabers. And then I mixed up a lime green between the white and the Tesseract Glow and blending that middle tone. I like giving the impression of light emitting from the hilt of the lightsaber. I'll do the same for the blue lightsabers as well. And lastly, I'm boosting up those edge highlights again with the white. And I want to paint the symbol on his cape, so I'm using coal black and some flow enhancer. And this helps thin that black right the way down, but makes it so that you can paint fairly thin lines with it. And so you can see I'm just adding dots where I think that pattern would be. And then I'm using a very thin stroke to help outline that symbol. It's a difficult area to get because the cape is so extreme with the curves. So I'm just kind of guessing where I think it would be. And then once I've got that outline, I'll then fill in the gap with the rest of the black. If I need to add a little bit of sharpness to those edges, I'll go back in with that original Necromancer cloak. And then lastly, I'm just doing some dry brushing on the base and the statue with some Zandri dust. I'm using some pigment powder to help add to that transition between the statue and the base. And this can be quite messy because it is pure paint. So I just add it in with a dry brush and carefully blow away the excess. And then adding pure coal black to the rim of the base. And then I just wanted to add a pop of color, so I'm using some Gamer's Grass, and this is a beige tuft. So I'm just adding some glue and gluing it into the corner there. And here is General Grievous, a fine addition to my collection. I love this miniature. Even before it had paint on it, it looked awesome, so this came out really cool. It is intimidating at first because you're like, wow, this is a big miniature, this is one of the biggest Shatterpoint miniatures, but there isn't much to him. He's quite spindly, so I just pushed my focus on those small areas. And of course, let me know what you think down in the comments below. If you've enjoyed this tutorial, feel free to like the video. And if you're new to the channel, consider subscribing. I do painting tutorials every week. Sometimes I do painting challenges as well. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one.